The following is a presentation of the Healthcare Facilities Network.
Hello, welcome to the Healthcare Facilities Network. I'm your host, Peter Martin, president of Gosselin Martin Associates, and as always, thank you for clicking on to the network. Today, we are presenting an episode on decarbonization. My guest is Andy Woommavovah. Andy is System Director for Trinity Health. Trinity is located in Michigan. Andy has accountability from coast to coast for Trinity Hospitals and Facilities Management, Construction, and Energy. Been trying to book Andy for a while onto the network, and I'm very pleased that we were finally able to find a time that worked. As I said, we have two episodes. The topic is decarbonization. Decarbonization, if you haven't heard of it, you will within the coming years. It's making its rounds outside of the world of healthcare facilities management because, quite honestly, decarbonization is a political issue, it's a social issue, and it's an issue of practicality and operationalizing it in healthcare facilities management. So it is a rather broad topic area. We can't get to all of that in one episode, but Andy brings a facility management perspective to the issue. Andy is presented with ASHE. He's presented at a number of regional engineering societies on the topic. It's very likely that you've been doing decarbonization efforts for many years in your facility. It just wasn't called decarbonization. And so we talk about all of that. Andy has a very interesting background from a military perspective, from a Native American perspective, and we talk about all of that in these two episodes. This is the lead-in to both episodes. The first episode, we talk a little bit about Andy's background. We talk a little bit about decarbonization. We start to get into that. Second episode, we focus almost the entirety in decarbonization. Some of the challenges, the opportunities, how difficult is it to put in decarbonization in these financial times. So we get to all of that with Andy, and I think Andy's perspective, he knows the topic. We talk about funding for it, we talk about the finances for it, but Andy brings that facilities management perspective to the topic. So I hope you enjoy decarbonization. I'm sure we will do future shows on it because it is not going away. So if you have feedback, I would love to hear it. If you have a point of view you want to express, I would love to hear it. You can always reach out to me. So with that, I hope you enjoy our decarbonization. There's two episodes that'll be coming out. This will be the lead-in for both. So with that, let's go on to the show.
And I am joined today by a person, Andy Woommavovah, that we've been trying to come to a schedule. I initially wanted to have Andy on the High Reliability podcast, and we were trying, and then we're canceled. So I am pleased to welcome Andy onto the Healthcare Facilities Network for an interesting topic today that Andy is well versed in, and you'll probably become well versed on in the coming months and years. We want to talk about decarbonization, but before we do that, I would like to ask Andy to introduce himself, please. Andy, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you, Peter. Hey, well, good morning, everyone. It's really an honor to be here with Peter. Like he said, we've been trying to connect on this for a little bit. Schedules and job changes kind of got in the way. But I'm Andy Woommavovah. I'm the system leader at Trinity Health for Facilities and Construction Services. I came to Trinity Health by way of Common Spirit Health, which was the merger of two companies, Dignity Health and Catholic Health Initiatives. So in about 2018, they started coming together, and officially in 2019, they became Common Spirit Health. While there, I led the Energy and Infrastructure program for Common Spirit. But prior to the merger, I was at Catholic Health Initiative, CHI, which was one of the companies that merged, where I led facilities and construction as a national program. But I was really blessed to be able to still have a job at Common Spirit when the smoke settled, and it allowed me this period to really focus on energy and infrastructure, which was I had good knowledge, but by being able to spend 3 years totally focused in the operation of assets and their energy performance really benefited me now as I come over to Trinity to help them move forward in their construction facility maintenance programs. So very happy to be here with you, Peter.
Oh, my pleasure, Andy. Thank you. Let me ask, Andy, at Trinity, you guys have a pretty large footprint headquartered in Michigan. What's your scope of accountability relative to states, locations? What are you accountable for?
Right. So I'm accountable for the facility maintenance and construction programs in all of Trinity Health. So we're 58 plus or minus hospitals wholly owned. There's a whole host of physician office practices, joint operating agreement affiliations. But we're over multiple states. So we're in California, we're Oregon, Idaho, we're Iowa, we're Indiana, we're Michigan, we're Florida, we're New England, we're New York, we're Pennsylvania. So we've got a pretty large footprint as far as geography. And then within those geographies, we have kind of ministries that have little, smaller hospital systems that are all part of our program. Acute, non-acute space, and then we have a lot of physician office practices that are out there.
So Andy and I were talking before I hit the record button, and it just shows you how quickly time flies. You've been there for almost 18 months now, and so I was thinking, how often are you're located in Kentucky, I think still. How often are you out on the road? How much? And your travel is coast to coast. So what's the travel like in your role?
Well, it's been interesting. So when I very first started, travel was restricted due to COVID, and now we manage our travel just for budget and finance reasons. So haven't been out as often as one would think, but when we have challenges in our ministries that they need our help, we'll be there, boots on the ground, to help them. So for example, we had a critical vacancy in Hartford, and then we had to run up there and help them get a plan in place to continue to move them forward in their capital construction programs. I have a feeling that travel tempo will kind of increase in this coming fiscal year, which starts July the 1st, as we start to deploy more program initiatives around facility maintenance and construction.
In your role, is it, which there does need to be a hands-on part, is that been a difficult adjustment for you to not always be I mean, your whole life you've been boots on the ground, but has it been difficult for you not to be there and see and feel?
I think it's difficult at the very beginning, but once you understand the capabilities of your leadership in the field, you just empower them to continue to do what they're doing. And my approach is I always vision them, doing their work. They reach back for a tool, I slap it in their hand, and they keep going. And so that tool can be an actual tool, it can be assets, it could be resources, it could be finances for capital projects, it could be, fulfilling issues that are created by critical failures, right? They give us a call, and then we have them to start working on it, and then we all kind of deploy out and are ready to support them. And that comes in a wide variety of resource options. So it's not just funding. We're part of a GPO. We have GPO contracts that we've managed for service and equipment. So it's helping them understand where all of these opportunities are to leverage volume, leverage the size of the company, but also be able to have immediate response to their needs.
Excellent. So one of the reasons that I'd always want to have Andy on is just, due to his background. He's got an interesting background. He's an Army veteran. He's a United States Army Reserve Lieutenant Colonel, retired. You can see in the background there, he's got his OU helmet. So he's got his master's from Oklahoma in construction management. Andy is active on the national level with ASHI speaking. I know I see you all the time on LinkedIn with your that Kentucky group of healthcare engineers. You guys are very active down there. You like military history. So you've got a really interesting background, which is part of the reason I asked you the boots on the ground. Your whole life is probably, boots on the ground. So before we jump into decarbonization, tell me, Andy, kind of your career path. And as people know, and I say it all the time, and I get sick of hearing myself say it, almost like I get sick of telling my kids the same thing over and over and over again. Part of the goal of the Healthcare Facilities Network, though, is to increase the pipeline of people into the field. So talk a little bit about your evolution. How did you end up in the role in healthcare facilities?
Well, I'll tell you, it's interesting, and it's kind of both funny, haha, and funny peculiar. When you talk to facility directors and senior directors, VPs, and managers, when they started their career, the majority of them didn't start out saying, "I'm going to be a facility manager and director." They were doing something else that led them to this calling. And typically, when I talk to them, it's they worked at a hospital, they integrated with the staff, and they thought, I would really like to work here because they kind of found this calling. Healthcare has become a calling for me, but I've got 32 years in the military, retired 2 years ago. I started out as a draftsman because I was into construction, and I didn't know that option was available in the Army, but I needed to be able to pay for my school, so it was out of necessity. So I knew I was going to do it, and but I wanted to do it on my terms, what I wanted to do. So I got into drafting, and that led to a career path of construction, project management, project development. And what ended up happening is my military career supported my civilian career, and my civilian career supported my military career. So the things that I was doing and learning in the Army, the training, I was able to transfer that over into the civilian side with just techniques and tactics on how to do projects. More importantly, in the military, as you progress in rank, you have required leadership training that you have to go through. And it's not easy. It's challenging. Like they say, if it was easy, everybody'd be doing it. Like 1% of the population, serves in the military. And it's because it can be challenging. And the leadership training that you go through in the military is immersive, regardless of the branch of service. You get put into situations where you're forced to think, you're forced to act, and you're forced to lead. Well, when you transfer that over on the civilian side, you come to the table with all of these skills and abilities to tackle problem solving without even thinking about it. It's like second nature. You get a challenge in front of you, and you start doing military planning, kind of steps in the background in your mind, and you start to assess the situation. You start to understand resources needed. You start to understand who needs to help you do this, and then you're thinking on the fly. That's the thing I think that that has really helped me move forward, is because I don't have to necessarily take time to stop. I can take things in stride when you think about problem solving. And then just the skills on how to methodically plan a project or a mission, that's transferable to the civilian side. And then really the technology that I was immersed in on the civilian side kind of transferred over to the military, which made it more efficient. And I was a company commander of a construction company in the Army, vertical construction. So that's, carpentry, masonry, electricians, plumbers, pipe fitters. But what was unique about my unit is because we were an Army Reserve unit, all of the skilled positions that were in those platoons were more often than not filled by journeyman electrician, carpentry, masonry folks that did it on the outside for a living. And I'll tell you what, we ran circles around the active duty component doing the same job. Nothing against them. They trained by the field manuals and technical manuals, but these guys and gals did it real time every single day by code, and they could do some miraculous work. When we deployed to Iraq, I didn't get to deploy with my company, but my company deployed, and I got to be in the same theater where they were, so I got to check up on them. They were doing missions and projects way under the schedule that they provided, and they were receiving accolades and awards because they were providing real-time missions for the Iraqi government. We were training Iraqi soldiers in horizontal and vertical construction methods because they knew how to do it on the civilian side. They really were able to bring those Iraqi soldiers in and show them the best way to do it. And our mission there became teach them to fish, right? And then they will eat for a lifetime. Teach them to build, and they will build a nation. And it was really fulfilling to be able to do that. But we couldn't have done it as effectively without those skill-rich civilian trained soldiers that were training those soldiers.
Let me ask, when you were training the Iraqis, that's really interesting. What are some of the challenges to do that? And how, we talk all the time about how does the audience or how does your student receive the messaging? How did you do it, number one? And were they sponges? How did that process go of the interactions in the classroom and the teaching and the learning?
Well, again, it was funny, peculiar, and funny, haha, how we developed our training, our training approach. I was teamed up with a BBA, a bilingual bicultural advisor. He was a contractor to the government, trained architect from Britain, born in Iraq, raised in Iraq, left when he was 18. So he understood the dialect of the locations that we were assigned to train. And he and I just sat down when we first met, when I got in country, and just started brainstorming, because this was a new mission. Now, there were other missions in the past, but my assessment of those missions, they would just give the Iraqis stuff, boxes of tools and, all kinds of resources, but they never showed them how to use those. And so Qasim Murtada and I sat down, we started brainstorming. I said, well, our training doctrine is we do slides, we give them the content, then we take them to the field, let them apply it. So what we ended up doing is created two slide versions. I created the slides in English, and then Qasim converted them to Arabic. So when we deployed the classroom, if you could visualize, we set up two screens. We had two projectors, and then one projector was projecting English version, one projector was projecting Arabic version. So I could take my little laser pointer and I could point at all the Arabic words. I knew what they meant because I was following the English slides. And the students were real impressed. They thought I knew Arabic, but I didn't. I explained to them how Qasim and I teamed up to do that. And we were able to train them effectively because we could transfer the US language into their dialect so they could understand it. Now, it was interesting because we were assigned two engineer battalions. They were FERS, Field Engineer Regiments, actually. And one was in Taji, which was a suburb of Baghdad, and the other was in Diwania, which was in the southern part of the country. The soldiers in Taji were all college-trained soldiers that came from Baghdad. So, right there. And the soldiers in the southern part of the state down in Diwania were all older soldiers. So they'd been soldiers. They were kind of set in their ways. So I had a lot of skepticism, pointed at me when I was down south. And when I was with the soldiers in Taji, they were willing to learn. And here's kind of interesting story. Probably day 3 of our training program, I walk into the classroom and all the soldiers are in the back of the corner. They're talking, and they're looking. They see me come in, they're talking. And I was like, something's going on. I was just cautious, didn't know what was about to happen. And they had this little guy, little spokesman. He came out and he came up to me. Qasim was there and he was speaking to Qasim to translate. Well, they wanted me to turn the Arabic slides off and teach them only from the English slides, because they wanted to learn the language, but more importantly, they also wanted to learn, the construction processes. I was really impressed with them. And we would train them, we would give them tests, we would test their knowledge, and they just excelled. Now, the soldiers down in the southern part of the country were a little standoffish. It took me a little bit to gain their confidence. But the way I did that is I connected with them culturally. I'm a Native American. I'm a member of the Comanche tribe of Oklahoma. They were really interested in my name. I actually had my name translated, and I put a name tape on my U.S. Army uniform so they would see my name. And we talked culture stuff first. And we would just talk about my people, how they came from the plains, and how they evolved. And they really took interest with that. And so I connect with them culturally. And sometimes we would spend an hour talking about just stuff from my background and their background before we got into any of the educational content. Took the same approach with their leaders, their battalion commanders. We would have key leader engagements and we would have chai tea, but we would spend probably an hour and a half talking about culture and my family and their family. And we would just go around the room, spend maybe 10 minutes talking business. And that was the very last thing we would do. They would say, okay, what do you need? We would tell them, they would tell their staff, okay, go make it happen for them. So it was really interesting. And it was one of the, I take a lot of pride in my military service. That was the pinnacle, being able to walk away knowing that we taught them to fish and we taught them to build. Interesting, or kind of another funny story is it was kind of a challenge to teach them the difference between plum and level in their language.
Why was that?
It was just, we understood it, Plum is straight up and down, right? Perpendicular, and level is this way, but just understanding, getting them to understand that there's a reason why you want something plumb and something level.
Yeah. Interesting. How long were the class? How long did you have them in the class for?
So we had them 5 days a week. We would start at 7, take a 1-hour lunch break, and then end up at 4. We would do that for a week. And then typically on Fridays, we would have exams. Throughout the week, we would have quizzes on the content, but it was vertical construction tactics and techniques. And then also we had to, we learned quickly that we needed to provide some safety training also, because they didn't really do things safely. So we took a pause with the vertical training and did a big block of safety. And then we got back into the construction. Did that for almost 6 months. We had graduation ceremonies for the students. They really appreciated that. I had my senior commanders come down to participate in the graduation ceremonies. We stood in their formations with them, shoulder to shoulder. So our trainers were in their formations with them. we went to the chow hall with them.
Wow.
So we were
Yeah.
during the weeks that we were training, we would, when it was time to go to chow, we would just march down with them and sit right with them. And they really enjoyed that because it was just, we were a bit of a celebrity when we walk into the chow hall, but I purposely tried not to take advantage of that, just staying with the soldiers.
And it almost sounds like it, and maybe is it a best practice to kind of immerse yourself with them, especially when you have those cultural and language differences? It almost sounds like you immersed.
It is. You got to kind of assimilate to understand what they're all about.
Yeah.
And, but there's a fine line there. You have to be careful. You have to make sure that they understand that there's certain levels of authority and things you
Right.
can't press or you
Yeah.
can't cross. So you
Yep.
have to be careful with that. But if you do it the right way, it's very effective.
So one, just not last question, but we do want to talk decarb. But what was relative to your background as a Native American? You said Comanche.
Yes.
What was interesting? Not what was interesting to them, but what was something in your background that's interesting, or
Yeah.
they
So
know?
I shared with them snapshots of history of the Comanche tribe, and those snapshots included clans and tribes living on the plains. And when they read about and hear about history of the U.S., they understand about the cowboys and the Indians, and especially the students that were up in Taji near Baghdad. They were hugely interested in that. And it was just us walking through how we lived, how they followed herds, how they lived off the land, and really how they didn't rely on a whole lot of support to do anything when they were living on the plains and moving from Mexico up through Kansas. It was just that really kind of intrigued them, and the fact that we have domesticated animals. And I would show them pictures of my dogs and in the house, and they were like, "Your dog is in your house?" And I'm like, "Yeah, he's part of our family." And that they thought that was really interesting.
They don't keep the dogs in the house.
Well, they don't hold them as nearly in a high regard as we do as kind of family pets.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow, your whole kind of path is almost parallel. It's very interesting the way you've married both together. Did you plan it that way, or it just kind of happened and you look back on it, you're like, hey, look, it was all.
Well, it just happened like that. And you asked how I got into healthcare. Is I was a construction project manager. I was working in Tennessee. My wife was pregnant. I was always on the road managing projects, and through our Catholic church, I volunteered at a house for terminally ill AIDS patients, and we were changing the toilet out with the guy that manages the place there, and he and I were down on the floor pulling this thing out, and we had to do some stuff in the back in the wall, and he says, "Hey, you're pretty good with your hands. You should think about going to work over here across the street at Memorial Hospital." And I was like, "Well, I need to provide for my family, and I never thought about doing hospital stuff." But as months later, I'm away from home. It's on a afternoon. I'm getting ready to go back to the hotel, and my wife's pregnant, and I'm like, I've got to do something different. So that conversation replayed in my mind, and I went online to Memorial Hospital, and lo and behold, they had a construction project manager position open.
Wow.
So I applied for that position, got called for an interview, talked with the folks. I told them, I said, I've never worked in healthcare before. I know how to manage projects. And they said, "That's what we need. We'll teach you the compliance part of working in the hospital." And started working there and never looked back. And because it was a faith-based organization, it really connected with me and became part of my ministry. Not that you have to be Catholic to work there. I'm Catholic. It just worked out for me that I was able to, kind of have some fulfillment spiritually while doing that,
Sure.
providing, a safe space for those that are seeking care and providing the care. It just worked for me.
Yeah. Was that a CHI hospital at the time?
It was. That's
So
and
that
that's
was
how
the
I
entry.
the CHI program. Worked there for about 5 years. Got introduced to Skip Smith and Dennis Smith, who were the system leaders at CHI at the time.
Yeah.
They were developing a national program that really spoke to me, because I knew how you can leverage opportunities and even expertise across the nation with that. So I just opted in to help them, and they ended up offering me a position at the system office level, at the national level, to help move the national program forward. And that's kind of how I stepped into where I am today. Moved up when Skip left the company because of the merger. I was able to do some more things. When Dennis Smith retired, they moved me up. I was able to kind of walk in his steps and move the company forward. So that's kind of how I gained the experience to be able to be helping Trinity out today.
That's awesome. You guys had a great leadership group there. It's funny, I was emailing before you and I got on the phone. I was emailing Kevin O'Neill, who's still out there working, and I actually have Carol McCormick. You probably know she's retired now, but I'm having her. We're talking in July. She's just kind of talking about retirement and what she's doing. But so many good people who came through that through CHI at the time.
Carol's awesome.
Yeah, no, she is. So a very inelegant transition here, Andy. What is decarbonization?
Well, I'll tell you, that's a loaded question, first of all. And you can have many different answers to that question. And I would like to say that, when I talk about this, I'm talking about it from my opinion and my personal experience, not necessarily Trinity Health's outlook on decarbonization or the programs available, but decarbonization.
Andy, could I just say one quick thing before you answer it? I asked you the question and then I jump in, but I think just to piggyback off of what you said, because as we were talking, when Andy said, hey, decarbonization, I've been doing a lot of, you've been doing a lot of roundtables, you've been giving a lot of presentations. You're like, I think this would be good for people to hear about. So I started, as I told you, I kind of jumped into it to do a little more research of it. And from my perspective, there's a political element to it. There's a social element to it. There's a practical element to it. And either one of those areas, we could take the entirety of our time talking about it. But that's not the goal of this one. As Andy and I were talking, we're here to kind of talk about the practical ramifications of it and what it means and what it is. We can have other shows if people want to come on, they want to do political roundtables, I'm happy to do that. They want to do social roundtables, I'm happy to do that. For purposes of this, I think Andy, we talked about it. We kind of want to stick to the practicality, though we may nose our way into other areas, and that's not the goal or the intent of this discussion. Is that fair?
Oh, it is, absolutely. And that's kind of the way that I've approached this. It was interesting. I did a keynote in Ohio probably 2 months ago, and after that, folks were coming up and asking questions, and there was this one gentleman in the back. He was just kind of, he looked uncomfortable. It's like he was just kind of kicking a rock around, on the virtual floor there. And everybody left and he was still there. And I said, hey, how are you? And he goes, hey, I'm pretty good. He said, Andy, he said, I just wanted to ask you, do you really believe in all that stuff you just said?
Wow.
And I was like, he wasn't ugly about it at all. I mean, you could tell that he wanted to ask it because he was compelled to ask the question. And I was like, I do believe in it, because we in healthcare, we're responsible for 8.5 to 10% of greenhouse gases that are emitted in the US, right? So that just tells us we have to do something. And we know that greenhouse gases have negative impacts on the environment, and the environment creates negative impacts on, socially diverse communities. So why wouldn't we just want to do something where we have control? And in healthcare, for us in Trinity Health, that's a pretty decent footprint.
Yeah.
Because we are responsible for 8.5 to 10% of the total greenhouse gases in the US. We should do something. Our core values tell us to do something. So why not start somewhere? And that's why I tell folks that now healthcare is on this collision course with decarbonization. And I've been seeing an interesting kind of data point. It's like 60-30. 30% of healthcare systems are doing something with decarbonization, and about 60 are not. We did a real-time poll during the keynote, and that's kind of what it showed. Are you doing something? Yes. Are you doing something? No. And the reason I say we're on this collision course is some of you all may have recalled a few months ago, it actually ended May the 3rd, the Joint Commission put out a call for input on some proposed sustainability standards. Well, when you really read into them, there's kind of not a whole lot of teeth. They want you to monitor, they want you to report, they want you to do goals, they want you to have an accountable executive. But the second, third order impacts of that means that later on down the road, it's going to start to gain teeth, right? And become a requirement. There was so much input on that through my ASHE that it was really interesting to kind of follow that thread and understand all the feedback. And really, the comments were Joint Commission's about patient safety. How does this connect? And then Joint Commission read that, and they were very thoughtful. And I think what they're doing now is they're going to make those not mandatory, but you can opt in to do those if you would like. But that was interesting to see that feedback, because when you think about healthcare in general, we don't invest in our infrastructure the way we should. They're giving, whatever facility condition assessment you do, you're going to see a pretty big backlog of capital infrastructure that needs to be addressed. And then if you consider that across the system, and then you try to do decarbonization on top of that old backbone of aged infrastructure, you may not be as successful as you could be. So that's why I say we're on this collision course. And decarbonization is all about reducing that carbon footprint of a site, of a hospital location. And for Trinity, what we would need to do is, create a carbon footprint for the whole company, which means we have to inventory. And this is where data is hugely important, just to understand what our footprint looks like before we start to state goals. And then our goals can be stated based on, our footprint. And then we can start to implement plans to start to reduce that footprint over the 3 scope categories that are part of decarbonization. That's scope 1, 2, and 3. And Pete, you did mention kind of this social spin on this. Well, there's this other term out there called ESG, environmental social governance, right? Yes. So that's like the big bang 3-letter acronym that a lot of stuff falls under. The work that we do in facilities and construction usually falls under the environmental piece. So that's greenhouse gases, that's waste, that's climate change, initiatives. And that's where we play. So we would be able to do a lot of work there. But hospitals in general are already doing a lot under social and governance. They're already doing things. They're probably just not connecting it with this new ESG. But this ESG piece is going to become a pressure, because commercially, investors look at companies' ESG performance before they invest. Andy's opinion is this is coming to healthcare. And when we're going to go out as a system to try to acquire capital, I think our interest rates potentially could be impacted by our participation in an ESG program. So that's why I think it's we're still on this collision course, and we have to be able to do something.
Thank you for explaining that. Two quick comments, or two comments, and then a question to you. So Andy had mentioned the ASHE listserv, and as I said, once I started to kind of research it, that popped up. So if you are an ASHE member, if you are on my ASHE, if you go back, and I can put a link to it in this, but if you go back to around May 3rd is when, I think May 3rd was maybe that first post. I would encourage you to read it. There's great back and forth both ways. You'll think about it. So that, if you go back May 3rd, it's on my ASHE. So that's a great resource because I think you'll see both sides, and you'll have links to more information. This also, and Andy, you were in this particular magazine. This was this April? April 2023, Health Facilities Global Perspective, page 24. Good article in there. Andy, you're in there, as are many people. So those might be 2 resources. If you want to learn a little bit more kind of political, the social, the practical, I think both of those resources kind of help in that. One of the things
Hey, real quick, one of my duties that I've been participating in has been the ASHE Sustainability Committee. And I volunteered to help them, been working with them for the last couple of years. And for the last 2 years, we've been developing and providing tools to our membership all about decarbonization and sustainability. So there's a new sustainability roadmap that's been created. There's a new training program that's created, that's rolled out. We're going to show that live during the ASHE annual coming up in August. So there'll be a session on that. But I encourage all the ASHE members to go out to the ASHE website and look for that sustainability roadmap. Maybe we can provide a link to that here. And what we had to do is, with the committee, we created some task forces to really focus in on support needed. We did a focus group at the PDC Summit in Phoenix this past year. A lot of interesting feedback. Standing room only. We were really surprised. We
Wow.
thought we'd only have a few. A few showed up, but I turned around and looked. We had 70 plus people in the room.
Wow.
Fire Marshal may have had something to say about that, but it was really great interaction to get feedback. And again, this 60-30 thing was floating around in that audience because it was mostly all healthcare systems. But we took that back. The task force took that input and started building more resources for the membership. We're going to do another focus group roundtable at the annual on top of the sustainability training, but it's out there and ASHI's listening. And as we hear things from the committee, we bring it back to the committee and take it to the task forces. Pete, we even had one task force that was solely focused on terms and definitions because there are so many out there.
Yeah.
Net 0 to 1 means something to another. So we tried to focus that into only apply to kind of healthcare for some quick reference.
Well, that's I'm glad you brought that up. I was going to ask you, and I don't know if you know the question to it. And there's probably I've always thought that healthcare is 15 to 20 years behind everything else, maybe in their adaptation. That's just across the board, not necessarily one area. But the term decarbonization, as I was looking at things, is, steam trap maintenance, LED retrofitting your lighting, retro commissioning. Is decarb all of that? But is it a new term? I mean, have you guys been doing this for a while in some of these areas, but now there's this decarbonization, which is more of a global, universal term? Can you speak to that?
Oh yeah, that's a great point, because going back to the definitions and terms, we've been doing a lot of stuff that actively in the hospitals, but we've been doing it under energy reduction, cost savings, but it all directly connects to decarbonization. Anytime we reduce the amount of energy that we're using or the amount of steam that we're using, your footprint comes like this and it starts to go down, right? But it's got to be sustainable, right? You have to have a program that makes that sustainable so that it will always stay here and it won't start to pulse out further. And where we're buying our electricity from, where we're buying that steam from, that's all part of that scope 2 definition of our emission sources. And if you reduce that, and on top of that, if you're buying utility from green sources that are sourced from solar or wind, your footprint starts to go down further. But the important part is understanding first what that footprint looks like and picking a base year. So you want to pick a base year that's back in history. It can't be any older than 2008. But you want to pick a base year where you have your good first set of data that you can measure to. And then everything that you've done between your base year and your goal date accounts for what you've done. So a lot of folks don't really realize that when they're thinking about this decarbonization thing. But if you have the ability to track your data, and data is going to be king on this, it needs to be very efficient data. You've got to be able to see it. Andy's opinion, I think the future of this, it must be real-time data instead of static. So you can take action immediately and you're not taking action, kind of post-report date. All of this stuff, in order for it to be an official program, has to go into a reporting platform that all those outside agencies can come log in and look into to see how you're doing.
Did I hear you say that you can't go back any further than 2008?
So if you look at the climate pledge, they reference that you can't do anything older than 2008. So 2008 moving forward. That requirement for that's kind of the rule that I'm going by. But ours will be, probably in this decade sometime. Just because think about large companies, there's always mergers and acquisitions going on, so you have to be careful. When you pick when you pick your base year to anchor.
You talked about I'm sorry, I'm kind of going backwards. I wanted to go forward on the decarb, but I wanted to just ask you, relative to the person who you talked to in Ohio, who at the end, who said, "Do you believe this?" How did that conversation end? And did he, how did the discussion go once you told him, "Yeah, I do believe it"? How was he after that?
Well, I did spin on it. And I really outlined to him that in healthcare, we've been doing, just like we just talked about, we've been doing a lot of these things. So it kind of makes sense. We certainly don't want to be, Andy's opinion here, we don't want to be creating our own customers. So why wouldn't we do something if we know that it's having a negative impact? I said, our hospitals are in strategic locations. They're in communities where, we could probably make a difference. And we're not going to necessarily, throw money at this. We're going to do it incrementally. And I said, but if we can make change incrementally, it makes a difference to even one person. I said, that's why I'm in this. That's why I'm focused on this. And he appreciated that. He appreciated the fact that I didn't try to bring some, political spin to this.
Yeah.
Didn't try to shame on you for not doing it. It was really a holistic approach. And we also talked about our aged infrastructure and our ability to be successful with or without that. So he appreciated my feedback, and I appreciate him asking the question, because you could tell he really wanted to understand why I was up there. In the presentation that I gave, it was all about why it's important to me, not what government's telling us to do. And it was really strategies on how to be able to start your program, educate your staff, your team, your leadership, and then take a holistic approach to your program for either your hospital or your system.
This concludes episode 1 of Decarbonization. Please stay tuned for episode 2. As always, thank you for watching, and be sure to give this video a like. Have a great day.